for January 26, 2015. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as distributed by our city clerk?
So moved.
Second.
Motion second, council discussion. All in favor signify with yes.
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 Opposed with no. Becomes our agenda. We have one item on tonight's consent calendar. It is a Class C liquor license for the Waverly Area Veterans Post. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Second?
Second.
Council discussion. All in favor signify with yes.
Yes.
Opposed with no. Unanimously approved. The first item on our study session calendar is a review of our biannual subdivision sidewalk infill program. That will turn to our city administrator.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. As you will see in your documents this evening, we passed a resolution, the council passed a resolution back in September of 2013, providing requirements for sidewalks being installed in residential areas or areas that have curb and are just missing the link. And so every 2 years, we come back and review. Last year, I believe we identified a few homes and granted a few deferments. So tonight, Mike will go through the policy and give council an update on the status of where we are with some of these lots and then where we're headed with the program.
Engineer.
Yeah, so it was 2 years ago that the city council reviewed this, and the impetus behind it was we were having lots and lots of subdivisions, but we'd end up with some gaps within the sidewalk system. And so 2 years ago, staff put together basically a proposed program that the council consider that would objectively take a look at these and make a determination as to when it was time to consider installing sidewalk. New subdivisions that go in, once the infrastructure is approved, there's basically a 4-year wait before we start reviewing the lack of any sidewalks. This was the example that was presented to the council, and this is just for illustration purposes. This is up in the Impala subdivision, which for the most part has filled in. But when looking at the Impala subdivision, to the north was Murphy Addition, which had no sidewalk. And so we'd look at several conditions. The most simple and basic condition was the example down here, where you had housing development on both sides, but then there was a gap in the sidewalk system. And you know, we can see subdivisions where this type of a situation, you know, can be 10, 15 plus years that it sits like this, that we lack the connectivity with the sidewalk system. So it was reviewed that if you had, you know, definitely one gap in the sidewalk system, that was a potential candidate, but even up to 2. But if you had more than 2, like we have up here where we have 3 lots, this would be exempt from filling in sidewalk. Or if it was adjacent to undeveloped land, like we have over here or down here, again, it would not be required. With Murphy Addition, the lack of a sidewalk system, again, it was reviewed. The recommendation would be that it would only be required to make the connectivity across this street until such time as sidewalk would be added to the Murphy Addition, or until a house was built. When there's a house built, then the sidewalk definitely has to go in, and it has to go in all the way around up to the subdivision property line. That was kind of the recommendation. 2 years ago, the council heard from developers, heard from landowners of vacant lots, and basically decided to take no action and in effect grant everyone that has a vacant lot a 2-year deferral and reconsider it again in January of 2015. So in none of these situations was sidewalk installed until the home was built. Now, in Powell subdivision, as many of our other subdivisions have seen quite a bit of infill over the past 2 years. However, we still do have gaps in the sidewalk system in these newer subdivisions. And these were subdivisions that were reviewed and approved and deemed in the best interest by P&Z and City Council to have a sidewalk system. Following this methodology, first starting out with Centennial Oaks Golf Course, we would have, and I think, Bill, you said this one's actually under construction right now.
No, it's across the street from that.
Across the street. So this one on the south side still remains a vacant lot 15 years after the road system went in. So this road system, I think, was in around 1999. That's a condition that would fit that methodology. That's time for infill. Down at the east end, we have a stretch of 4 lots that are contiguous. So that would maybe be worth allowing to defer another 2 years. And that's kind of the same thing on the other end here. It's the last 3 lots. The roadway pavement ends out here, so there really, at this point, wouldn't be much gained by adding the sidewalk system. We get down on the southern end here, and this is, I believe this section was put in about 2004, I believe, and it had some housing development, but now all of the vacant lots are under private ownership, and there doesn't, at this point, appear to be any movement in building on those lots. This is the aerial from down there. And again, it's just an opportunity to see where there's gaps in the sidewalk system.
That one there, that double lot, didn't we split that in half, right, and gave half to the one house and half to the other, right? Shouldn't they be, I mean, shouldn't that need to be filled in because it's not part of the, like the house on the right there? Isn't that the one we did, remember?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, yep, we did a lot split.
I was thinking that was a lot of the conversation we had about that, and I was surprised not to see it filled in, I guess.
But that was not the council's direction. The council's direction was if there's a vacant lot, give it a pass. And there were only, I think, about 3 lots that had development upon them without any sidewalk, and those we
Right, I mean, but this was after that decision. I mean, they took this lot and they cut off a little sliver of it, which can't be built on. It's part of that house there on the right.
correct this piece.
I see that as a different case, I mean.
So this go around might be a good time to go in
I
and
think that
say,
should continue,
Put
you know,
it in.
if they're gonna split that lot up and that's gonna
Since they've
become
left
part
it
of
as
the
their
house, part of the yard.
So we can identify as this, and our procedure from here would be if you're identifying these, say, hey, you know, let's initiate some contact with them. We will send notice out to them, and we will come back to the council asking for a directive to, yes, get it installed. You know, that the property owner would have until the start of September to install it, and if it wasn't installed by Labor Day, then the city would incorporate it into our sidewalk construction program. So this is just a review, this is identify, and then staff will send notice out to the property owners. So is it just this stretch up here on the north side? Or do you also want to consider the other, looks like 1, 2, 3 this is now built upon here, so it's just these three lots on the south side.
And this particular one is the younger, that's the younger of the whole division. The northern part of that has been there for a while, right?
Well, this area, I think, was platted in 2004.
So we're 10 years on that. I guess that's kind of the trick I look at is, you know, what's a reasonable time to say you own the lot, do something with it, or put a sidewalk in.
I was thinking that was part of our discussion last time too. Is it still a developer-owned lot or had it changed hands? And to me, if it's changed hands when somebody bought it, anticipating to build on it, I think to me, I put more weight on asking them to put the sidewalk in if it's been a few years and if it's a developer, because we don't want to add more cost to the developer, but.
Yeah, that's where I would think it'd be interesting to know. I mean, if I bought this lot 6 months ago when I'm waiting, I wouldn't want to put a sidewalk in. But if I've owned it for 5 years, there comes a point where either you build or you don't. But,
They're all five more, I mean, they're all been owned for quite a while.
but yeah, I mean, that was our discussion, is we didn't really want developers to pay for it, because then it's just going to get torn right out, and they're going to add that cost to the lot price, and it makes it harder to sell those open lots. But
Again,
But if it's private, I mean, if it's privately owned, it's still gonna add cost, because they're still gonna rip out sidewalk to build a house, so it's gonna increase that. Because you don't know where the driveway is, and you need to have a thicker section for the driveway section, and yeah, that's what I struggle with, and I guess I also struggle with the fact that, you know, we're just including subdivisions when we have maybe parts of the core town, not parts that don't have sidewalk, but parts that do have sidewalk, but there might be some random house that doesn't. And we don't talk about that.
Well,
I'd like to include the whole town if we're gonna talk about it. I'm not sure how I feel about it yet, but at least I would like to, because I know a couple parts of town that have a sidewalk, and then some house doesn't for some weird reason.
I've talked about that before, particularly on my street. There's one where it just ends, you know, sidewalk midway coming down the hill, and literally like you're falling off a cliff when you're on that sidewalk. I guess, you know, cost is a factor, but I'm looking more at the connectivity portion of it, that it's a matter of after a certain amount of time, and so to me, it's what is that reasonable amount of time that we should expect them to have done something with it. I mean, I understand buying a lot and waiting a few years to build a house, but what's the reasonable time frame in that? And I certainly agree with Chris that we need to be looking at the rest of the city too, but this is, you know, one starting point to be able to go back in places where there are other sidewalks and do that, and then find those places within the city where there are a few other gaps that we go.
Wouldn't part of the consideration also be when the person who owns the lot plans to build? So if we pushed a sidewalk and within 2 years they're planning to build in 3, then they're
I'm
back to
thinking
the
about building next summer, you know. I think we're going to do it next summer, you know.
Well, as I say, we could,
Next summer comes around and.
we could leave a 1 year, leave some discretion in there for city staff to grant a 1 year waiver. I mean, I know we did that with the old Irving site, to grant a waiver on that, and did that as far as
Isn't
figuring out what they were gonna do with that lot, and then ultimately.
Isn't part of the process, though, once they get notified, they can ask for a deferment?
Sure.
So, I mean, that might be where, yeah, I'm gonna
Okay.
build next year,
Yeah, just so
or
we have some sort of,
at least we've got it on record. And then if it
Consideration here.
hasn't been built on by the
Right.
time we review it the next time, and
Now, part of what I hear from Bill, because he lives out there, so I'm going to kind of pick on him, is we also have the issue of the people that own these lots simply not maintaining the lots and mowing them and doing those types of things, so.
Bill now has a municipal infraction to use.
Well, and that's what, yeah, is kind of coming. You know, I understand the desire of people wanting to buy a lot and maybe sit on it as investment, or maybe they are thinking about building, but, you know, I also hear from the neighbors that are like, when are we gonna get the sidewalk done here? When are we gonna get the connectivity? And I think Bill here is, how come they're not mowing the yard? So, you know, we have a shortage of available building sites that are on the market. And, you know, if people are gonna, if you're gonna buy a lot, you also have to be accountable and responsible for that lot. Whether that's mowing and maintaining the yard or putting in sidewalk and having to do the maintenance on that as well, you know, primarily snow removal during the wintertime. Okay, moving on. The next one is up in the Copper Ridge area. We have two sections of Copper Ridge. The older section down here, there's only one lot left. It's privately owned. And we have a sidewalk system through the Maple Hill subdivision. But again, there's one lot that's missing. In the newer Copper Ridge section, which I still think is pushing 10 years old. There's all, you know, we got, I guess, 5 houses up there. There's not really connectivity to other neighborhoods. So, we got a recommendation, love to hear it.
What is kind of, I'm just curious, what do you guys think is a reasonable time frame? I mean, we throw the phrase out, but what does that mean? Is it 5 years? Is it 10?
10 seems awfully long to me.
10 years for a developer owned lot or for a private owned lot? I mean, I think there's two different.
But even if you sit privately on a lot for that long, and if in fact neighbors are looking for connectivity, who are already there, it seems like 10 years would be a long time, but.
I agree. It just, I don't know, 10 years to me seems like right about a good round number as far as that goes, just at least from the start of the subdivision and how long it's been there, from when the first houses do start going in, that it's, you know, not immediate, but it's giving a little bit of time for people to do action. Looking at this one in particular, it's kind of that, the question I always have is it is connectivity, so I'm looking at the northern portion there, and what is it really connecting to? What's it going to? The southern one here off of Ashbury or Asbury, here down to third northeast, that one seems like a reasonable, that should be connected. That's it's connecting to the rest of the system going into downtown. What's up north of that, I'm not sure if it does connect through, or if there's anything, or if it's just in that little area.
Yeah, so we've got sidewalk down in here just for the one house, and then, you know, there's 2 lots on this side and the 1 lot to the north.
But then, if I'm understanding the map, if you go to the east across the throat of the circle, there's sidewalk that would come up around the 2 houses on the south side there.
Right. Yeah.
Again, I look at that, if you cross the street, you've got sidewalk.
And that's an area where there's not gonna be a whole lot of traffic, so it's, at this point, it's not I guess it's not a rush on this particular cul-de-sac that's there.
Yeah, I mean, there's no, the road is basically sidewalk, I mean, if you think about it.
Yeah.
So this was, let's see, 2005 is when this
Still within inside 10 years.
subdivision was platted.
I think some of the easy ones are, I mean, if you own a house and then you bought the lot next to you, you should probably put a sidewalk on it, because you own both of them, kind of like that one we were talking about where they
Where we
they both
split it.
own the lots next to them.
Yep.
I still struggle with forcing a developer or anyone to put some, I mean, this whole division, if we force them to put sidewalk on all those lots, they're just gonna jack up the prices to $10,000 a lot, and then they're hard to sell, so.
Well, and they're not even connecting to anything besides their
Right.
neighbor at this point.
Yeah,
which
that's
is-
true on that.
But are we talking at this point about actually developing a new guideline or code that city staff would follow, or are we just giving input? I mean, I think, if it's 10 years and there isn't any construction, I mean, if there's still hardly anybody living there and they're not needing or wanting connectivity, then, then why not leave it alone? But if it's a different kind of scenario, I mean, so it's not clear to me what our goal is, just to give you all input, or are we actually looking for some sort of resolution, policy resolution?
I think it's input tonight, but they could come back with an actual resolution as far as what the policy goes, but to make it,
See,
make
all these subdivisions that we're reviewing, the infrastructure, in particular the sidewalk, the plating and the sidewalk was all reviewed by P&Z and City Council, and it was said, you will put it in, when you will put it in. And the developers had to carry a performance bond, so that at any time the council could call upon it and say, you got to get the sidewalk installed. And then the discussion came from the developer saying, well, we don't want to carry a performance bond. The city council has the right to go in there and require the lot owner, whether it's privately owned or whether it's still owned by the developer, to install the sidewalk. Council agreed to that because we were then also beginning to initiate the sidewalk inspection and maintenance program. So that became our annual program to go in, inspect, and if the council directs, install the sidewalk and have them properly assessed for it, or they'd have the option to install it themselves. So we have this program that systematically goes through and evaluates and allows for this, and we're contracting it out, so it's more readily accommodated today. So now the question is, every one of these developments that we're reviewing tonight, when they were conceived, the P&Z and council at that time said, we want the sidewalk installed to be completed. As some of these houses were built, the property owner simply didn't install it. You don't need to complete your sidewalk to get an occupancy permit. So they would move in and simply not complete the sidewalk. And that's the situation on the next one. When we go down into Eliason Edition, we have the two property owners here that should have installed sidewalk up to the north property line at the time they built and completed their house. They did not. 2 years ago, they were informed that they need to install a sidewalk. They came to the council asking for a deferment. The council granted a 2-year deferment, which is now up for renewal again. And so this is the next one that the staff is looking for council direction on. Do you want to automatically grant another 2-year deferment, or do you want us to inform them that they need to install it now?
The policy, to Edie's point, back in 2013, the resolution reads, infill is required when any lot that's built upon, that has adjacent curbing and is within a subdivision requires it, should have a sidewalk. It's not required on any vacant buildable site. And then city council will reconsider adding sidewalk in January 2015.
See, what makes it hard for me on this one, though, is both houses on the side, there's no sidewalks.
Yeah, there's no connectivity.
Well, there's nothing, if they built the sidewalk like the one on the right, it's just gonna go to nothing, to nothing, to nothing. I mean, I can see downward, it makes sense, and all in the front, but
Which is why I think we granted that deferment, which
Right.
I would do the same thing again.
if there's no sidewalk, you're going, I mean, this would,
But Wes, to your point, the P&Z and City Council knew that in 1995 when they reviewed this. And they knew the sidewalk would extend up to a subdivision that didn't have it. But there has been for decades talk and discussion about extending sidewalks into some of these neighborhoods, and in particular this one, because you're within walking distance to Southeast Elementary School, which is up here.
Right. No, and I think that's more kind of what we should talk about, but
And agree, yeah, I think,
Make sure there's
once we
good
get
ways
to
to
that
get to
point
schools and those
of
kind of
doing the
stuff.
whole connection, then yeah, this makes sense to do that, but right now, it's not connecting to anything else. So if they were connecting to something else, then it becomes, it makes, it's, makes sense to have them do that, but at this point, you're asking them to connect to, you know, a neighbor's their yard where there's,
all you're gonna do is walk around the corner, then have to take the street the whole rest of the block. I mean, there's no sidewalks at all until you get to Southeast, so it's just kind of weird. I mean,
But I guess the question could also be whether continuing it would encourage more continuation of it.
I don't think, see other neighbors just deciding out of their own
I don't think
goodness
anyone's gonna decide
to put a sidewalk in on their own there. We're gonna, on like Third Street there, we're gonna have to, as
But
a
isn't-
council, make a decision that that's where we wanna put a sidewalk to go up to Southeast.
And,
But isn't that what we're saying, is that we should be talking about that?
Yeah, but once we talk about it as a whole, right now, we're only talking about these two small slivers, and to me, it makes no sense to ask them to do that unless we actually moving forward with it. For example, to me, at the one on the west, there already is a sidewalk on the west side of First Street there that would seem to make sense to continue there on, what's it,
On First Street?
on First
Third.
Street. Yeah, over here, the 7001. There's one there, and I would continue, say that would seem to be the one that makes sense to continue going north on. Because it is a continuation, and that one's gonna go straight down to the Cedar River Parkway. So it is the one on the other side, but this one is continuation. Because that's where Cedar River Parkway is going to be accessible, is off of First Street there. And that's the sidewalk on Parkway is on the north side, correct?
So why wouldn't you make that same argument for the other side of the street?
I'm just looking at where it goes right now. If we're gonna we could make the decision to make and put sidewalks on both sides of the street. But if we're not gonna continue that sidewalk all the way north to Jonky, I mean, if we're gonna make it go all the way north from this house on Eliason and First, if we're gonna go to Jonky and First, then yeah. But again, we're not at that point of making that decision of where we want those extended sidewalks to ultimately go. And do we ultimately want to go through and put sidewalks on both sides of every street in town, or we're going to be okay with putting sidewalks on one side of streets?
Have we had that discussion in the past about going through and just outlining, I know some people call it safe routes or call it whatever you want, but actually just highlighting, saying we think we need to focus on this missing link
well,
or
we
this
kind of
10
hope that the Safe
blocks.
Routes program would come to us, but I don't know if
Yeah.
they meet regularly anymore, or they kind of talked about it for the one, they started with
Even though
one
there was
school, but,
one, but.
yeah, there
Okay.
there
was
is,
some
but I
discussion
don't, I
there,
don't think
but-
they've met for a year,
But
or
we've,
2 years,
and,
or.
and I know I've asked for this, even going back to the start of the sidewalk program, was to look at some of that infill for places where there weren't. So,
Step one was to get the house in order, make sure that the sidewalk systems that we have are regularly being inspected and maintained. That was a 4 to 7 year process. Then the next round was going to be to continue to inspect and maintain, but then look for gaps within the sidewalk system that would make a lot of sense to infill, such as, I can pull up some examples here. Up by the hospital, we have a 1 block stretch here with no sidewalk. Sidewalk system on both sides, but we got 1 block stretch with no sidewalk.
Were those platted, I mean, were those supposed to have sidewalks, or is that an old enough, that it was kind of optional back then, or?
I don't
Long time
know.
ago, long
Sure,
time?
that's
That
pretty
one's
old
far enough
there.
back, and I know,
Yeah.
I know when we did the first part of the Second Avenue reconstruction, we had originally talked about doing the whole way from 4th Street to 16th Street, and we cut it down to basically the railroad tracks over. But at that time, we had talked about sidewalks there on that particular stretch of Second Avenue. We also talked about, they added sidewalks over there in is it First Home Edition, where we did the Second Avenue already, we did put sidewalks in.
Right. Here's other examples. This is up by Cary Elementary School. We got, was this is Second Street here, I think. You got sidewalk that comes up part way up the hill, then just stops. And you're a block away from the school system. Now, yes, you have it on the other side, but it doesn't really create the completeness and continuity within the system. So this was, and here's another one coming down on the other side where, again, you got a 1 block stretch missing sidewalk. And those were things that we're going to address in like years 8 through 14. In years 15 through 21, we were going to go in and look at areas like the Jonky Edition or First Home Edition or Second Home Edition, entire subdivisions that were built with no sidewalk system at all. So that was kind of the 3-phase approach to it. And then it got kind of thrown in here because we had some residents coming in these newer subdivisions saying, 10 years, when do we get the rest of the sidewalk system put in? And that's when it was, the council wanted to review it every 2 years. And so it was, the decision was made every January of an odd year to review this.
And again, I go back to when we started the sidewalk program, I had suggested at that time looking at some of those infill connecting portions as we did that, as we go through, because it seemed to me to make sense that I know it costs a little more to put a new sidewalk in versus replacing an existing one, but if we've got the people there doing sidewalks, they're there doing sidewalks as opposed to,
We,
Do it all at once.
at Cedar River and 7th Avenue there, the lot that I was talking about where it falls off the cliff, we put a curb cut in on the corner, and it's on the corner. There's no sidewalk leading off of it, off the corner. It's just there.
we also have a problem as we need a sidewalk along the 218 by the cemetery. Now children have to, there's a sidewalk on the other side, but you have children have to cross over. Increasingly, we have so much business, including children being sent to Hy-Vee or wherever, to Miller Hardware, and there's no way, or just adults. How do you walk up there? You got to walk into the street or cross over. But in a busy time of the day, that can be very problematic. So we have to think of that corridor of our city that needs sidewalk there too, it seems to me.
Just to help me kind of understand what the goal of tonight is, I think this is all good discussion around the whole sidewalk program, but are you really looking for us to go neighborhood by neighborhood and say yay or nay, so that you can go on to the next phase? Or are
Well,
we
that's
just looking for
the
input?
direction the council wanted, is staff tried to come with something objective that would be conditional situations, as opposed to picking and choose and saying, well, this one's owned by a developer versus this one's privately owned, or, we don't like to do that. We like to look at the situation conditionally, regardless of who the owner is. Or, reasonable amount of time ought to be given to allow these areas to develop and infill. But very obviously, there are some areas that people just bought the lot and are sitting on it.
So we're going to go through each of these and we're license.
And just pointing out there that 2 years ago, the council granted a deferral. If you want us to grant another deferral, we certainly will.
I think on that one.
Furthermore, the discussion on First Avenue being more important, which Tim brought up.
Well, I was talking on First Avenue on the west side here. If ultimately we look to extend the connection into Jonky and along there, or if we're continuing here, but right now there's no talk about going north from
at
either
all.
of those spots, so I don't see a reason to require those at this point. The owners, I think, know that that's probable in the future, but at this point,
Yeah, I don't see, until the whole neighborhood has to do it, I don't know why you'd make two property owners put a sidewalk to nowhere.
Those are the last only two that haven't in that neighborhood, so I mean, where's the fairness in that?
Well, they did put it, I mean, they happen to own corner lots, so they did put it in where it was important, they just didn't do the side that went to nowhere, you know?
103 went up to the driveway, it looks like.
yes. And see, then I get into the point of, what I brought up when we discussed this several years ago is, they've got a sidewalk going to an empty lot. Do they have to shovel that in the wintertime to get the snow off? Our city code says they do. Nobody's gonna go and walk along that and then turn back around and walk back to this driveway to go back out in the street. But they could be held,
Yeah, I know.
of course, a municipal infraction against them for not having their sidewalk cleared.
And when are we thinking that we might attack that other neighborhood to the north there?
Sounds like another.
In the 20s,
Another-
roaring,
another-
we'll call them the
another
roaring
nine-
20s.
nine
Roaring
years.
20s.
New roaring 20s.
That should be next
Yeah,
year.
I mean, I like the fact that you having it's just you're just coming to us with guidelines and then it's up to us to grant the deferrals. I mean, I have no problem doing that. I mean, you're just coming with static, this is what they should do. And then, leave we're the ones that would grant the deferrals based on, these situations, but.
You can, if you want to continue with what was approved 2 years ago, all you do is say, let's continue on, with the exception of these two, which you need to renew the deferral.
I mean, to me, that sounds reasonable. I mean, for me, it's a question of, do we spend a lot of time talking about these two, which don't seem to be as important as some of the others? So, so grant the deferrals, and let's look at the others where we take a
Well,
more
I
rules
would say
approach.
also looking at Copper Ridge, do we make that one, that northern portion of it on Copper Ridge, where there's only the 5 houses, is that something that's necessary right now?
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. I mean, there's not.
Yeah, how long
I mean,
have
it's-
those been there?
We're at 10 years, that's the 2000
Okay.
But I guess
plating of those.
I look at the south section of that coming back into the established neighborhood.
Right, I'd say that
Yeah.
one down that's labeled 1002, that I would say yes on that. I'm talking about that northern circle. And just because it's, and I guess my rationale would be it's not connecting to anything else, anywhere else, and it's not gonna be a heavily traveled location where people would need to be off the road, or we'd want people off the road for traveling purposes. So it's,
Even that one, to me, I would not be in favor of that because there's a sidewalk right across the street from it. And there's no traffic,
there is, yeah, I agree.
that doesn't seem, that whole Copper Ridge, I don't see a need for any sidewalk.
I
Personally.
think we've all weighed in. Hickory Heights.
Yep, and what I just want to point out with Hickory Heights is the only gap in the sidewalk is clear at the north end, and this, again, this, based on kind of the criteria that we established, this is adjacent to what kind of amounts to almost a rural type setting, a large acreage at the time. It was, they even had some horses there, and so that's why the sidewalk was never finished off across here. And I guess, we kind of see that condition continuing. And so with that, I mean, certainly it is a gap. It's a gap of,
Almost 3.
again, 300 feet maybe, 300 to 400 feet. And kind of what we've said is, this almost constitutes like an undeveloped section, and so it wouldn't mandatory to put the sidewalk across unless the city wanted to do it.
Makes sense.
They still have horses, but it's behind, like, that corner lot on the dead end. There's still horses behind that. North of that, would be south of that, I'm sorry. North, whatever. I can't.
Okay, next one's High Point. And in High Point, based on kind of the criteria that I've been talking about, there's one vacant lot, privately owned up here, and it's developed on both sides. And then the other situation is down here that I'm not sure if that's, I think that's just one lot now because it's been split off a couple of times, or slivers of it have, so kind of falls back into that condition where you've got a single lot with housing on both sides. But again, based on the what was approved 2 years ago by the council, they're allowed to defer sidewalk until something is built. Remember our example, the Impala subdivision? It's nice to see we're only down to one lot left. It's adjacent to a farm field, undeveloped land. That's one that we really don't see pushing the issue on. But, you know, when you make the comment, sidewalk doesn't go anywhere, you know, if you built the house in 708, what we hear a lot from, it's just a farm field, it doesn't go anywhere, why do I have to put it in? Well, at some point, the plan is there will be, so. Moving,
On the High Point one, sorry, I'm just a little slow here. On the, on where the cul-de-sac is, and there's no sidewalk, so there's a privately owned lot there and an empty lot? Is that,
no, I think it's all one owner.
It's all
now.
one
I think that's when we
ownership.
split, yeah, if I remember right, planning and zoning did this a few years ago, that that 1312 bought a portion of whatever,
of 212?
of 212 there, and they split the lot, and then it was split and then combined into one.
Yep.
And why wouldn't we want to finish that section there of sidewalk?
No, that's for recommendation with the circled, isn't that?
Oh, it is recommended? Okay.
Well, but again, this was based on the criteria that we established, that if you have the, you know, if we're jumping over vacant lots, that they would get filled in. 2 years ago, the council said, if it's a buildable lot, they don't have to do anything until such time as the house is constructed.
Staying on High Point, I'd like people to weigh in a little bit, because those are both possible move-aheads. Dan, do you have any feeling on those two?
Yeah, I guess I've been going back to the ordinance that was passed 2 years ago and just trying to remember the rationale behind it. And so basically, we landed, if there was a house on it, it needed a sidewalk, but if it was vacant, regardless of who
For
had
how
the
long.
ownership of it,
Right.
we said it didn't need to, so. Again, I think Mike's showing us examples of where maybe we need to rethink the ordinance we passed in 13 and say, if it's privately owned, maybe we give them 3 years and then, just as an example, and then say, put a sidewalk in if you haven't built on it in 3 years. And I see the one up at the top at between 1201 and 1209, 1205. Again, that seems reasonable to expect that person to fill that in. It was not filled in 2 years ago, so it's been under private ownership for 2 years, and so maybe,
I would agree with that also, but we can't do that, right? If there was a resolution passed not,
we would just have
Allowing that.
to
Just amend it.
amend it,
Okay.
and,
Yeah, because we just basically passed do nothing for 2 years.
okay.
Was the option that I believe I motioned for, and we,
if they were vacant, we said, yeah, we'll
Yeah.
revisit it in 2 years, and
if there was a house and there's supposed to be when they never did it, like the ones we had examples, but then we gave those.
I mean, in
So
some,
there were a couple of, there are a couple that actually put sidewalks in, right, Mike, that, from what we did 2 years ago? I can't remember. Were there some houses that didn't have them and ended up putting them in?
Right, right.
So there has been some infill.
Well, I would agree with Dan on the 1205, and I would also include the cul-de-sac.
What's the overall age of this one? Is this the same, in that same range of 10 years plus?
No. Subdivision was created in 2003.
So it's,
So, yeah. Just a year over.
because I guess in that case, we've exceeded the 10 years even that I would even necessarily give to the developers to have it for the connectivity, because there's people up here on Second Avenue, even if we do 1205, they come over to 12th Street, they don't connect to anything else. They, I would be looking at going down 12th Street there to connect out to Bremer and have them connectivity where they can continue out, at least on one of those sides. I don't know.
All right.
Where does Gavin Drive go? What's to the east of that?
Nothing yet.
Nothing? Okay.
Will that be where,
Councilman Gay, do you have a thought on these two?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, 1205 seems, if they've owned it for 3 years or more, I mean, I would think that seems legit.
The adjoining landowner owns that. The
Does
next
it?
house to the left.
See, that's where I would say, I mean, if
kind of like out at the Oaks?
if you're a landowner and you bought 2 lots, then you're kind of, I would say you're responsible for that other lot. That makes sense to me. Cul-de-sac, I'm not 100% sure. I don't know.
Well,
But then all those developments going down, I mean, I don't see any reason to do all the ones going down that are all development, because there's just nothing there, you know?
Those aren't circled.
maybe,
But they don't connect to anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would only say the cul-de-sac, because you do have 4 houses,
Right,
you
it's
know.
pretty close.
it's- And they're,
Set lots
yeah.
There.
But,
But again, with
I
the
mean-
cul-de-sac, it's like a dead end. I mean, there's gonna be
Yeah.
2 cars coming in. I mean, there's just not much traffic there either, so it's not, I don't know.
I mean, if we're looking for some language to put in an ordinance, if they're developer-owned lots, sidewalk has to be put on one side of the street. Again, if I remembered here, these are 5 developer lots, so if we had them extend one side or the other, again,
What
thought is you
continues
could always
down there?
cross the street to get to a sidewalk, and
So you have the connectivity?
instead of
That-
forcing 2 sides of the street to be sidewalked, you do one, and
And for parenting, I still think that when connectivity there in the cul-de-sac would be a safety issue, even though there's not a lot of traffic in a cul-de-sac.
Yeah, Mike, do you have the satellite on 12th Street there what's
Sure.
coming down?
there
So
was,
you know, the Geyers own 1307 Gavin now. It's not developer.
and you are
Oh,
going to
okay.
develop?
Get those sidewalks in, Carla.
That's right.
well,
So it doesn't look like there's
No.
sidewalk going
Months.
down 12th Street either all the way.
no, there wasn't. And,
So that's just where
Aside
I
up-
struggle. I don't,
Yeah, I guess that gets to the larger question of overall connectivity, and I wouldn't necessarily require the developers at this point then to put it in where there isn't, because there isn't any further down, but that would be certainly something as a council we ought to discuss. 12th Street there does not have any connectivity out to Bremer for any of those houses, other than going down the street.
Yep. Yeah, it's just hard. I mean, I don't want to do anything that makes it harder to sell lots, you know? I mean, that's one, so if we're gonna charge a developer to put it in and they're gonna raise lot prices, or the people buying it know they're gonna tear it out and have to put it back in, I mean, that's just,
But in some
That's where it gets
cases,
a little
that's,
tricky.
that's kind of the risk of doing business, though, and starting a development, I guess, is, in some ways, that is ultimately our responsibility as a city is to connectivity and safety issues for our citizens, and if we're
And I
wanting
think, like you
sidewalks to
said,
get people off the
In some places, it makes
streets.
perfect sense. In other places, if you're going into a whole nother subdivision that doesn't have any sidewalks,
Exactly.
why would you force one to do it and the other
Right.
one's
Yeah,
not been
so
there?
That's
this,
why we're
this one,
waiting.
since there isn't any connecting down, there is no reason to put anything else, require anything else in right now.
Is that enough?
Right now.
Is that enough on High Point?
Sure.
Engineer?
He's hearing plenty right now.
Clears
Impa-
mud,
How about
clears
That's
Impala?
the, probably the less input,
really
the better,
curious
as far
about
as Mike's
Impala.
concerned.
Oh, well, as I was saying with Impala, there's only one left, and that's
Let it go.
clear at the east end against some farmland.
That's
Yeah,
Prairie
yeah.
Park.
So it's, within 2 years, I think there was
quite a bit there.
4 or 5 homes built. So, yeah, that filled in nicely. Yeah, and there's just the one lot now clear in the far northeast. So,
What's the timeline on Prairie Park?
well, yep, going.
2012, is that correct? No, that can't be.
Prairie Park, you mean, when was it
Yeah,
platted?
mm-hmm,
2004.
okay.
And, kind of based on that, the methodology, there's, they've had quite a bit of infill, looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 houses, maybe in the past 2 years were built up there, so, there are 4 vacant slot left up there.
But you're only recommending the 2 of them, is that right? Am I reading your coding right?
That, yeah, based on kind of the criteria that we put together, there's 2 that would,
And on lot 301, you're really only saying the tumbleweed part of it, not the thistle lane part of it. So you're not doing the full L, you're just doing the. If I
Right.
can-
That's what.
because it, to the north is undeveloped land.
Seems reasonable.
So if there was further development to the north, as soon as there was, now it would have to meet that same criteria, and it may have to continue on around to the north as soon as there was a house built north of there.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think that makes sense.
Do go to that playground.
Hmm.
I mean, to me, what you're proposing seems fine, and I think if they wanna come and ask for deferral, and they have a reason, or, if the developer comes and says, hey, I got someone looking at the lot,
Yeah.
but,
Well, if I'm the developer, I'm gonna say we built 10 houses in 2 years, so don't make me put it in, because,
Right.
there's, the lots are
action in that
moving,
area,
yeah.
yeah.
So,
I would say though, like what we talked, if it's privately owned and the person owns the lot next to them, that kind of makes sense that you should not only mow the lot, but put a sidewalk in and upkeep it. That makes perfect sense to me, but.
okay. Well, I know of 3 of those situations where the adjacent lot owner owns the vacant lot next to them, and they really have no intention to do anything with it other than to sit on it for the time being, so we can identify those and bring those back.
I would agree with that, too.
Agree.
And on Rolling Hills, I agree with your recommendations, too, if we're ready to move on to that.
Now you're ahead, before you were.
Behind, yeah, sorry. I'm just getting in the flow now.
Okay, now again,
Moving-
Rolling
moving right
Hills is
along.
another
Keep
situation
pace,
where they've built
A lot.
10, 14 homes maybe in the past 2 years out there. So it's filled in pretty quickly, and if you want to stick to the thing about adjacent property owners buying lots, there is one out there.
Which one is it?
It's
3814?
3606 is owned by, I think it's 405.
I mean, I think a lot of times people buy an adjacent lot just because they want a bigger yard, and so
Yep.
I don't know, unless someone comes and offers them a huge price for it, they're probably gonna sit on it forever because they like having that extra lot as a playground, or maybe there's a garden there or something, I don't know.
Right,
But,
so I think these two are owned by the same,
To me, that would make sense to have, you own the lot and you're not, have any plans of selling it, you should put a sidewalk in. And you should maintain it and all that kind of stuff, that we've talked about, but. But some of these, like this development where you said it's a pretty fast moving, there's been lots of, it would be hard for me to force a developer to put a sidewalk in 4 lots in a row when they've been selling them, quite often throughout the last couple of years, so.
Right, but the ones on top there make sense, don't they? The 3608 and the 3714.
I'd say the 3 that are marked.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
yeah. And 3701, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they can always come ask for a
Rolling Meadow.
deferral.
Right, right.
They're still fast out there, too.
Yeah,
So,
those are accurate.
There's a car just parked in the middle of the grass.
so out in Rolling Meadow, we have, I believe, 3 of the 4 vacant lots are privately owned, but they're, again, we get into these things, they're privately owned by builders, by contractors.
Oh.
So are they a developer or are they not a developer? So.
It kind of depends on how long they've been sitting
We're
on
gonna
it.
get this resolved, not complicated.
And,
but-
there's probably a pretty good chance those 3 are gonna get built on the next couple of
Right.
years, if not this next spring or summer. I mean, just how fast that whole subdivision is filled up and
That thing filled up so fast.
90 houses or whatever there are.
and what's the date of this, the plating of this one?
Oh, I think a couple different timeframes, but I think, again, we're right around that 10-year timeframe on these. One that we'd kind of like to consider is Waverly Light and Power owns this one here. And what we thought from a logistics standpoint would be
What was that
nice
again?
to.
The bottom right corner.
One that says city.
Where it says city?
Oh, I'm sorry, I gotta switch you over here. Yeah, the one that says city there. But is to look
yeah.
at the possibility of taking a sidewalk and bringing it down to 10th Avenue here.
Yeah.
It's kind of a shortcut. That may, we have the sidewalks here that go into the park system in the middle. Tat, is this where you're looking at a shelter too? I know you got.
They requested a shelter.
They requested a shelter, yeah, they got the playground equipment and the big open space, but, it's a pretty big subdivision, and we thought that, at some point it'd be nice to get a sidewalk connection down to,
Yeah.
the larger, wider sidewalk system.
Took a shortcut through there many times when I lived there. I always thought that'd be a good spot for that would be pretty neat.
So I think this is something that we want to internally look at and explore a little more, and may come back with a recommendation on this at some point.
Walk the railroad tracks, you can find like all.
Okay.
I mean, even that one, I would be inclined probably to grant. Well, I guess we gotta talk about time frame overall, but, I think those things will fill up, within the next year or so. I hate to force someone into putting something there temporarily.
The next one is Stonehaven subdivision. Again, this one is, in the last 2 years, has seen a lot of infill as well.
That's a lot.
So,
Lot of activity.
Mike,
So-
why would you be recommending the L-shaped portion over toward the west end?
That's got the, part of that has the wider sidewalk trail system. But again, where you see the red boxes, those are basically the new housing that's gone in the past 2 years. So we've got about 12 houses that have gone in 2 years. So this is starting to infill pretty quickly. Not sure, with the waterway cutting in between those two, how quickly those will go. But I'm going to switch over to aerial so you can see the
Is
the
that a
sidewalk
commercial
system.
lot out on the, that large lot there?
Well, it's residential, commercial. It can, I
High
think, go
density.
either way. And
So what is that big empty lot there? Or
For sale.
whatever it is, that
Yeah.
green space or whatever it is? The 54003.
That just developable.
Oh, okay.
So that could be multifamily or commercial or
That's the church, right?
right south of it's that church. Yep. Spawn and
Dennis.
Rose is across the street. to the
Yeah,
west.
Spawn and Rose, yeah, the dentist is a little down, so.
I mean, it would-
And so why would you want to put sidewalks in on the north and west side of that developable lot? Isn't that what you
Rather
showed
than
on your
waiting
other?
until
What?
it develops.
What's that?
Is the question, rather than waiting, why would you do it now?
Yeah, yeah.
So you want the connectivity along Third to children or whatever to walk up to there, take a right, cross the street, and be connected with the sidewalk system. I
Well,
assume.
eventually, this is part of the trail system that's going to go from Waverly down to Janesville. And so looking at the aerial, you've got the wider
16th is the wider, yeah.
trail system on the south side of 16th. And then that was to connect across to
Oh,
the west side over here, which then is supposed to head south. There are basically three sides to the lot. So, we treat it as three faces. And it was anything more than two would, trigger review. So it's basically flagged for review because of that.
so the north end makes heavy sense and the other makes some sense. 'Cause then it connects in. Dan, you want to weigh in on that? It's a judgment call.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to have the sidewalk on the north side just to connect the true residential part. So I guess I would put it on the list and have the owner come back with and ask for deferral and explain plans for it. And I think that's a good piece of what we did was identify it if it makes sense with the criteria we laid out, which I think needs to be adjusted based on tonight's conversation, but it's, we're not mandating they do it. It's, yes, you need to do it unless you ask for deferral and.
Well, and
have a
I mean,
reasonable-
in that case, if I would extend even the eastern leg going north and south because you've got all of the other sidewalk with those houses that have been recently built connecting right up to it as well.
True?
I was just thinking that more than likely, the entrance to that lot would be on the east side where you might not have to tear it out on the north side. If you're gonna do a commercial development, you'd probably come in off of First and, but
Yeah.
you never know.
Yeah, it depends what, it goes there.
And
Okay.
then last
Hold
one
on.
is the Rolling Meadow, Willow Lawn subdivision. And down below is a much, much older subdivision where we've got two lots that have probably for 20, 25 years been undeveloped.
Would seem legitimate
Yeah.
candidates.
That one on the bottom, I don't even think is for sale. I don't think it's this one on the market right now. The one you have circled. Not that it matters, but
I guess I would do all the ones you've recommended. What is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6?
Now, in the
Seven.
one up here, there's been more recent development. But what I do want to point out is we have in this location where the property owner bought both lots, but only installed it on the one side. I'm not sure if the house straddles the lot, both lots or not, right offhand.
On that end, though, it goes straight into a cornfield too, so I know 301, my uncle lives there, and they put a sidewalk all the way into a cornfield, and I asked him why the hell he did that, but he said,
Well,
because that's what I'm supposed to do.
He was
so
being
I-
compliant.
Yeah, you're supposed to do,
Yeah.
yeah.
The law.
I'm like, you just walk straight into that cornfield some days, or what are you doing over there?
Field of Dreams.
Why 05's in trouble?
The ghost players come wandering out.
We're gonna ask it again.
this is what they're supposed to do.
No, I know,
They're
I know.
supposed to get it, grade it and get as close to that property line as they can.
Carla will
Because
clean up the language.
so
on that,
often what,
please.
what we see happen, Wes, is that, you know, you get 10 years out. You now have a different house owner. The subdivision now does get extended.
Right.
Who pays for that 15 feet?
Yeah.
Is it the developer to the west? Is it the current property owner? And that's why having this stuff installed properly when, like the house is built,
Yeah, no, I know.
prevents a lot of future heartburn.
Now, is that something that we need to clear up in the language that, or in the enforcement? Because you said that they don't have to have sidewalks in to get an occupancy permit. Is that something that we can change in our language
don't-
that?
No.
You don't want to change that because I moved in January where there was no.
Right,
Yeah, there's no pouring sidewalks in
but is that
January.
is that something that says it must be done by August in your case?
Well, I mean, that, when I got my occupancy thing, it said, it said it will be installed by July or whatever it was.
So
it
that's-
was a condition of mine, but I don't know what they did, you
So
know,
that's,
10, 15,
that's an
20, 30 years
enforcement or
ago.
a follow-up issue on our part to make sure in that situation so that those don't fall through the cracks.
Right. The recourse is, it comes back to the council to direct staff to, if necessary, install it and assess them. That's what we're doing today.
Yeah.
So far, we're kind of
Hopefully,
leaning
it's,
toward all
hopefully
seven.
it's more immediate within the year as opposed to 10, 15 years in some of
Yeah.
these cases, yeah. Moving forward.
By your house every day this summer, at least.
Exactly.
No, I have sidewalk.
You have sidewalk now? Good.
I've been there for a year.
So far, we've spoken kind of in favor, Mike, of the 7 lots you circled here, but before we move on, I wanted everyone to weigh in. Did you weigh in, Councilman Gade?
Yeah, again, I mean, this is so filled in, I guess I don't have a problem with it, but again, I mean, I could see them coming for a waiver and saying, you know, those 2 lots, hey, give us another year and they'll be sold, you know, and
Yeah.
we make a decision on that, but,
I think that may be the case.
because this one really has
with
filled up
these-
too, I mean,
These two right here,
yeah.
and possibly even this one. But
one's saying we
again,
should-
this is a situation, adjoining property owner owns it, so now I guess we're up to 4. You know, it looks like at least 4 of those situations. And then, you know, you can kind of, these 2 have been so long out there that, you know, I can support kind of sending them a notice and saying, hey, you gotta come, either do it or plead your case.
Right, yep.
Okay.
Okay, so what we will do then is, we'll make sure that we have these identified. We'll probably bring it to council one more time, get them notified, get the property owners notified, and give them the opportunity to come in and explain if they want a deferral, why they want to do that.
A technical question, I mean, some of the lots we've identified tonight would not be lots identified with the criteria used in 2013, so you're also going to bring forward an update to the ordinance that says lots contiguous to an owner,
Right,
because right now the ordinance says if it's not built on, they don't have to.
right, we'd have to amend it, yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure we march those 2 together.
'Cause that's our action-taking language.
Because if you send the letter and they look, well, show me the ordinance, and it's like, well, I haven't built on it, why are you telling me I have to put it on there? So we just need to make sure the ordinance matches our desires.
I guess I'm still not sure about all this, but I guess I don't like the timeline. that we're gonna do this and make them install, if we do this, make them install it this year yet. I mean, it's a pretty decent investment. Could be a pretty decent investment. I don't know. That's just my thoughts for now. I gotta think about it some more.
But we do, I mean, Mike would probably say they just come back as a, but they can come back and petition to us for whatever reason.
They also have the option to
For the
assess
next
it. It can be assessed over a number of years, just like the others are.
I just struggle with it because, you know, I bought a lot that was on the market for 13 years, and I know what it would have cost me more had there been a sidewalk there, and I know what it would have cost me to tear out part of it and put it back in. So I struggle with that, but then I also struggle with the fact, or don't struggle with, there's a couple down for me that was empty, and that was a struggle. You know, my kids can ride their bike up and down at night. So I see that point. I see that part of it too.
Yeah.
So, but it's just, yeah.
That's why
One of the things that I
direction with,
struggle with.
appeal, I think that's what Councilman Gade is looking to. Got to come back to it, they can always appeal. Excellent presentation, we thank you, city engineer. The second item on our study session calendar is our economic development policy and procedure. Turn this over to first our city administrator, who can defer it if he'd like.
Thank you, Mayor. We've been talking a lot about economic development and strategic planning and where we're headed. We've also talked a lot about our upgraded Economic Development Commission, and they are looking at this, and we'd kind of like council to give just a little bit of input on this as we get started down this road. What you have in front of you is really a strategy document borrowed heavily from other cities in the state to really start helping us understand who do we want to recruit, who do we want to try to retain, and how do we put together different incentive packages for folks based on what criteria and what goals. So I'll let Bill drafted this, and I'll let him explain more about the details behind it and where we're headed with it.
Thank you. The first thing I'd like to say is that the policy was intended to be kind of a broad-based statement of intent, kind of statement of what our general purpose is in doing this. It wasn't supposed to include the specific things that we might create. We're right now operating under a resolution 07-57, which was an amendment to 06-11, which actually set forth some criteria that we still use, tax rebate schedule, the requirements for what's a good job and how do we incent a good job, and it basically defined it as $10.50 an hour, which obviously is too low for now. And so we'd like to revise some of those criteria, and we have some other criteria we'd like to use. We'd like to kind of adopt some of the state criteria that they use for giving incentives, whether it be for good jobs and what are good benefits, that kind of thing. But my first, and I guess the initial thing for me to do was to say, I need a generalized policy that says, this is what we're about, this is what economic development is about, this is what giving incentives is about, which is why I was trying to do the big picture of the two-page policy. So, you know, I know that Dave Reznicek gave some good comments. I'd like to have those in discussion at another time when Dave's here. But he brought up some great points that I still want to discuss, but not necessarily include within the policy. And maybe some would be in the policy, but some would not. So I would like to see it start a debate about what's on the table for incentives, you know, because I think what I've included in there when it talks to important considerations for financial assistance on page 2, 1 through 8, does include some different kinds of goals that we would try to reach. And those are goals that, again, I thought were good ones from the ones I was working with, the other cities, but aren't necessarily the only ones, and maybe they're not as important to us as they are to other communities. So I'd kind of like to establish those things that we want to put up, the important considerations, what we think is important. And then on the, beyond that, it's just really a matter of kind of figuring out what kind of projects we want to use, what kind of methods do we want to use, and where do we want to focus our efforts. I know there's been, I've been told probably numerous times since I've been here that we don't give incentives for housing. And I guess I'm thinking that maybe we have to put that back on the table. It wouldn't be maybe the same incentives other communities might consider, but we have a housing study that's now identified quite a few areas of need in our community. And it may be time that we have to think about a way to maybe provide some incentives for some types of development that wouldn't necessarily go on its own. And I don't even know what that is at this point, but if you start considering whether we will consider housing, then we'll start thinking about how we can put together a plan to try to give some incentives for certain types of housing, if that's necessary to get that housing going. And if you say, no, we don't want to do that, then I won't bother to work on those kinds of projects in the sense of trying to come up with incentives. We still work on those because we still like to encourage people to build here in all ways, in all kinds of housing needs that we've identified. So it was intended to be a broad-brushed policy declaration, and that's the way I'd like to have it considered, because I think there are other things that we need to discuss in terms of strategies that are maybe more specific. And then I'd maybe take some, you've had this for a week or two, and maybe you have some questions, or, and the application was just my response to the fact that when I asked for where our application was, I was told we don't have one, so that was my main intent, was to say we need to have one, because I think we need to have a formal process that starts with an application which identifies certain information. And, you know, even on that application, the idea was, well, what do you think about that? My thought was we have to have certain basic information. I know there's been some concern about whether we know exactly who is all involved in a particular project, especially when it's a limited liability company or a corporation. And whether we need to know every single investor, whether we need to know a primary investor or a designated representative. I'm putting it out there to say, what kind of issues do you want, what kind of information do you want me to acquire? I know that most cities, at least at the beginning, don't get everything up front, because sometimes it's just a question as to whether or not we would consider incentives, and we don't need to acquire everything when we're just fielding questions and trying to determine if they're in the ballpark. And if we say, yes, this is something we consider, we need more information, that's when we'd ask for more information on the application. So I think this is kind of the application that I'd like to use when we think that they've got a good plan that we might give incentives for, and that we want them to get the information for us. I know one of the suggestions from Dave was that we should get a lot of information, kind of like a SBA application packet or a financing application packet. I guess that's another thing we need to discuss. Do we need to go that far? Do we need to go part of the way? Certainly we need to be satisfied and do our due diligence that we feel that it's a legitimate company we're working with, that they've given us truthful information. But we also have to understand that a financial application or an application for financial incentives is usually a request for just a small part of the project, maybe an important part of the project, but maybe a 5% share or a 2% share or whatever. And when we get the information, we have to be very careful with what we have as a public document, and whether we need to have them give us information that would then become public or could become public, when it's really not that large a part of the project. And in those situations, that they may just say, well, forget it, I'm not going to give you information like that. I think we have to make a kind of a judgment call on how much information do we need, and especially if it's a company we know we've worked with, or even a local industry that we've worked with for a long time. You know, do we need to have that much information about some of those companies? Maybe if it's somebody coming in that we don't know about, and we're not sure about, and we don't trust the information, certainly we would want to at least look at that. But whether we make them presented as a public document is another thing too. So we have to, there's always both sides of all these issues, and I've tried to keep the information to be very important for understanding the project and understanding the need for the project and the need for the incentive, so that we can at least judge as to whether or not we feel that it's important that we give it in order for the project to actually go. I mean, I know there's people that have presented applications for incentives where they really didn't need the money, but they might as well ask for it. And those are hard ones to judge, because sometimes you want to give a good business a little, yes, we want this and we're glad to give you something, because they may still do the project, but that also may color their attitude towards us in the future. So that's with the financial assistance part of it, and that application process. I think we can start doing that, and I planned on using it anyway, but I just wanted to get feedback on it. And then the last thing I had put in the memo was the Small Business Facade and Improvement Program, which I still think is a very important program to give some incentives for people to improve their incentives in upper stories. Clearly, I think it's a situation where we need to reserve the right to say no under certain circumstances, depending upon what kind of money they have in the project, or what kind of money they need in the project. But I think it's a process that, you know, that application, I think, is still pretty good and still does a good job of getting the information we need. So I like to continue that program, and I think that's but that's still a judgment call, and I'd like to make it more clear that the council still keeps the discretion to award or not to award, even if they comply, even if they fit the criteria, because there may be other circumstances that would mean that you would say it's not the right situation for that.
Exactly.
So,
General reactions?
Well, I mean, Dave sent some comments, and it was this afternoon. I haven't had a full chance to read all the way through all of Dave's, so I guess before diving too deep in, Dave's got a good background in economic development and some ideas in terms of financing and that are certainly meriting review. My initial thought on it was I was a little bit concerned with it seemed a little clunky, a little extra work for somebody to, you know, coming in. I understand the need for some background and thorough, but I don't know. It's kind of that, you know, how much is too much versus how much is enough, and finding that balance as you mentioned. So I was a little bit nervous on some of that it might scare somebody away, or we had discussion about you know, who's specifically involved and how does that happen with public records and what that, and certainly I think once we're getting down to an actual agreement, and if we can separate it between the fact finding and kind of initial decision making to the actual settlement, and somehow I don't know how that works with public open records requirements in terms of the initial contacts and stuff, and how much has to become public record if nothing goes through with it versus what's open. You know, once we make a deal, obviously everything should be open, and that's fully. I'm just a little nervous that you got some of the background work, and people will start using that as leverage against us to say, oh, they won't go this far, but you know, where's the tipping point for different projects or something, which may or may benefit us, may be used against us by other cities to know, oh, Waverly's not willing to go that far, we can go just that far and beat them to the punch on something.
and I appreciate that, and I think really what I'd say to that is, this application form would probably be used as my notepad to start with, where I would take notes in interviewing somebody and kind of put down the information that they tell me. You know, is it an expansion? Is it a new thing? Is it, you know, I'm just kind of keeping track, and that would not necessarily be retrievable. If it's an application that's submitted for consideration, I think once that happens, then I think that becomes something that they're submitting for a public, because they're formally requesting public assistance, and I think that's that's the point where it become, if they signed it and said, here, it is, I'm ready to submit it. That's the way I would look at it. Otherwise, it's gonna be my notes. It's gonna be me keeping track of my notes, and I don't think, I would fight to keep that from anybody.
And the other comment on the facade program, that's something, Phil, that, do we set aside a certain amount in the budget for that, or has that been pulled out of the budget? I think we used to have that, there was a set
There's a
amount.
little bit in there, because the chamber's running 2 programs, and I think they fund their own facade for like $5,000, don't they, Jack? And I think it's actually part of our contributions to them, and so that would be like if you're putting up a new sign or an awning or something like that. This one in here appears to be more of a rebate program that they put up that is facade and upper story, that was trying to get at both.
Okay. I
And
think this came in somehow with the crawdaddies, if I remember.
I think so too. I think it's a 2012 date on it, which would have been about the right time, I think.
If I
2011.
that was about when that came through. Maybe crawdaddies was a little before that, but this was,
It's all.
it was
it's
in
all incre-
conjunction with that.
And I have not, in the 2 years I've been here, I've not seen an application like this come through.
Well,
So it may be out there, but no one's
I
using
don't
it.
think it's very widely known in the city. I think the chamber one people
The
kinda know
chamber.
about, but I don't know if people really know that the city has a.
It was,
The problem with this one is if you're not making a significant investment, it's not gonna pay you a whole lot, because if you're not improving your,
$750.
if you're not gonna improve your property by an amount necessary to generate $750 as increment. So you have to raise your property values, and I can't remember if it's 7,000 or something, before you would even qualify to get the incentive. So you have to actually spend 7,500 to actually be considered for $750. So it's an increment of the taxes on the improvements, just like it would be if this was $7 million and you were trying to do an increment based on the increase in value on your property tax. So the numbers are a lot smaller unless you're doing a really big project for your upper story or your facade.
I mean, do you still like that
Well, I don't think
program,
it's
or do you
very
think it should be
valuable.
retooled, or?
I don't think it's very valuable because there's not very often somebody's gonna do a really big project, like spend $40,000 or $50,000. When they do that, it's a nice incentive. But most of the time, that doesn't happen. And it's not as much of an incentive, even if they do that, because if they raise their property value by $50,000, then we have to calculate what's the tax and what are we gonna give them back out of that increment. It's bigger for industrial business park type people when they're spending the money, the sheer dollars. But a smaller investment isn't quite as, the incentive isn't quite as high.
If you own, like, if you weren't part of the whole flood, CDBG thing, and you owned a couple buildings downtown, and you wanted to totally redo the upstairs apartments and fix your tuck point on your brick, I mean, I could see that being quite expensive, but
Right.
to put up a new sign, that's kind of where I think the chamber comes in, because they would help with those smaller kind of things that would really help your business look nicer and more appealing, but yet it's not gonna raise the property value that much, so.
And we've talked in the past, and we even have it built into our cash flows, it just doesn't flow right now, of setting aside money, setting aside, $20,000, $25,000 a year for these types of programs that would be more of just grants, where you wouldn't have to create the increment for it. And so I think that as those look at different things happen within the TIF or our debt, and we can cash fund those, then we need to really look at a program to say, all right, it's been kind of easy in the past saying rebates work great. If you're gonna invest this much money and you're gonna increase the increment, it's easy to do a rebate because you're essentially paying us first. But when it's cash out of pocket, so to speak, for the city to somebody, then you really need to look at what's it worth? What are we really targeting for these grants if we know that it's important to retuck point a double-wide building 3 stories tall, but the increment will never be there.
Right.
So this time, it's important for council to say, yeah, let's go ahead with a $20,000 TIF grant, or,
Yet if there's no way to do that, that building could crumble to shreds, and
Right.
that building owner might not have the $40,000 to just throw out, and, I mean, that's where that,
it's that catch.
yeah, right.
I'd
And
like,
I think that's why we want to work towards funding those in the future if we can, knowing that that's another key part of our priority.
I'd like to see a matching grant program of some kind. I mean, maybe with a cap on it to say, if somebody's gonna tear off the front and fix the facade and put $10,000 into it, can we match it with 5 to 5, or can we do that for?
This is what Manchester does, and I don't know what they're at, 3 to 1 or 2 to 1, but it's generous, and that's how they're keeping their downtown happy. And we have a vested interest in certain buildings that are, we're going by it every day. I mean, we're watching them crumble. So I'm with Wes.
Yeah, it's a good thing to have.
Just a couple questions, I guess, on the documentation you gave us, Bill. I guess, and maybe I'm using my day job too much here, but Kingdom Mutual has policies that are general, broad brush, safety is good type things, and then they have procedures that sit behind them on how they achieve that. And I guess sometimes I'm wondering if some of us aren't expecting this to be more of a procedure document. I guess when I look at some of the things Dave called out, I would expect those to be in the next layer of documentation, the procedures, so.
Right.
Is-
That was my expectation.
Okay, so my sense is you're asking us to kind of hand wave over, this is the policy, knowing that once you know what the policy is, you'll develop procedures to allow us to apply that policy.
Right, and the end of the first page and the beginning of the second page, it basically says that the city shall use various evaluative tools, including established benefit spreadsheets and other performance tools. We're putting those together. We're working on those at this point. And so maybe when we come back, we can have some of those tools that we can share with you. I really intended to have a few more available for now, but it wasn't to be. And so I think that's one thing, if we bring this issue back up when Dave and the other Dan are gonna be available, that we can have some of those tools that go with what we're talking about as far as a policy.
There are some things, though, that Dave brought up, and this actually crossed my mind on this particular point, too, that are still within the policy, this broad brush stroke. And one has to do with making affordable housing units necessary in order to qualify. And, I mean, I kind of wondered about that myself, too. I mean, I know, in general, we know from the housing study that that's something we need. On the other hand, you could have a project that would be quite beneficial to the community, and if there was a compelling case for it without affordable housing, why wouldn't we want to support that as well?
Well, and I think that's the one thing about those considerations, 1 through 8, and that's one of those considerations, isn't saying that you can't have a residential incentive if you don't have affordable housing. It's saying that's an important consideration that kind of counts. The idea is that you might have 3 or 4 of these that apply to a particular project, and if you have 4 of them, you're thinking that's really one of those high priority items. But you could have a project that has only 1 of them, which is still an important thing for your community. It was just kind of identifying those. It's really hard to say, what do you think we should incent? And, you know, I know Iowa City likes high architectural site design, that kind of thing. Maybe it's not as important for other communities, and that may be a lesser factor for us. But in energy efficiency and sustainability, that's another one of those. There's some communities that find those to be higher priorities, and maybe that's not as high on our list. But when you talk about creation and retention of high-quality jobs, that's a pretty no-brainer when it comes to business and industry. Or the redevelopment of underutilized or blighted properties. Those are things that you really find, those are universal type things, so.
I'd say the way you're talking about it now, though, gives me a different impression than when I first read it. I mean, because of that introductory sentence of developers will be expected to meet some or all of the following standards.
Right, and not in priority,
Sounds
though.
pretty strong, yeah.
But it's, you know, that's where I was, when I talked to the commission about this a little bit, which I didn't get a chance to really discuss it with them. My question was, what other factors do you think are important for us to consider in incentives? Is there something I'm missing? And if there's ones that you don't think should be as important, then tell me that too. So that's kind of if you want to email me and say, I like, you know, 1 through 6, but I don't like 7 and 8, or whatever it is, and then maybe some wording changes. I just want to kind of set up that policy.
And I read what Dave said, and I mean, I agree with a lot of what he said too, but I can see Dan's point is, and what you said earlier, the very initial thing, you probably don't need a business case and all that kind of stuff, but when it gets down, or if it's a huge chunk of money they're asking for and it gets down to the nitty gritty, we probably want to make sure that we're going to get a return on the investment and they're not just going to fold in a year. And, so you got to have get more of those details as it gets closer to really giving a huge chunk of money out. And I totally agree with creation and retention of high quality jobs, but I think he put in there too, like, what the heck's a high quality job? It could be,
We've come up
it
with.
could be 20,000 for some people, it could be 100,000 for some people. To me, a job's a job, so it's kind of hard to determine. But that would determine from maybe the level of what you get. But I don't know if I would discredit a small business from coming to town. And if they ask for help, they just might not get as big of a rebate because their jobs are not. as much.
And the state does have some criterias now for that, and we plan to incorporate that into our strategies, because when we were working with some recent projects, we were looking at quality jobs being created, and actually the state kind of had a hierarchy, so if they were a certain level, they were good, and if they were above that, they were great, or, something like that, where they would incent more above and less in the middle, and maybe not much in the bottom layer. But they still found that it was important, especially if you had 10 high-quality jobs and 20 decent jobs, they would give you more incentive because the decent jobs added to the quality jobs. And so it's really the mix of different kinds of jobs.
I just, like I said, I wouldn't want to totally discount someone that might want to fill an empty spot on Bremer, and they might have 4 employees that are modestly paid, but if they need help, and they're not going to be $100,000 jobs, but they're probably not going to ask for $1 million or
Yeah.
20% in equity in their thing.
Or they may all be part-time.
But there might
So
be,
they wouldn't be considered high quality, but they'd be important to the people with, yeah.
there might be other factors too, because they might feel like blighted property or.
Yep, that could all fill
Right.
in too, yep.
Right. I think that this is a good start. I think that we do need broad strokes, but we have to build in flexibility or we're in deep trouble. We can always check it here at the council level, but you need flexibility because all these circumstances, everything I've seen in development my whole life is individual. Every one of them are crazily different from the other. And so you need some flexibility, but we need the guidelines. And then we can pick it up in our group wisdom later.
I guess that's the piece I struggle with. If we had 15 projects a month coming through, we'd want more, usable criteria. But when you're only getting 15 a year, and only 2 or 3 of those make it to a serious negotiation, it's hard to put a lot of structure around that because they are so unique. And
Yeah, everyone's really unique. The one thing that I think I brought up before is just that we only get to know about the ones that come to council, but it would be nice to know, I know it's confidential, but, everyone that comes and asks for something, it'd be nice to know that, because then when you do say, okay, we really believe in this one, I can say, okay, well, these 4 came along and this city, your staff decided they didn't quite meet this criteria, but now this one does, and I have some background to know what didn't make it and which ones do. I mean, that's where I kind of find like I think last year we had 2 or something we did, but there may have been 10 that we said no to. You don't know those. We only know the ones that come to us. Mm-hmm. And so then it's hard to know, well, which ones didn't make the criteria and which ones did, and why didn't we accept those, and why are we accepting these? And
Yeah, and that's where I guess I'm trying to say that right now, residential, we're pretty much saying we don't give incentives. And so if somebody came to us and wants to build elderly rental housing, or they want to put an apartment building up, or they want to do, we're telling them that we have no incentives for them. I mean, and there's quite a few people. Now, if they say we want to put housing in a blighted building or one that's underutilized, we don't say absolutely no to that, because there's another criteria there. But if we're just competing, and we have, it isn't like we get 10 a year or 10 a
right.
month.
No, I know.
But there are no absolutes.
Inquiries.
So even if a housing group came to you and it's to the advantage of the city and it needs for this growth and meeting our growth challenges, we can always adjust the policy.
Right.
We
And that's,
need to, if housing won't work unless we're involved, then we at least need to take a look at it.
Yeah, I guess I don't, I don't want to automatically take housing incentives off the table. I mean, I think we, I don't see no harm in talking about that, you know, depends what it is, but
Well, I haven't taken anything off the table that I thought met our housing needs through our study, and so that we're still exploring those issues. It's just a question of, we haven't even got to the point where they've said, well, I'm really interested now, what can we do? What can you do to help me? And if we get that point, then we'll start talking about it.
And I think especially in residential, we may need to look at the way we approach incentives differently. Usually it's always towards the developer. Maybe when you get to residential, your incentive is to the owner through utility abatements, or, you know, if a developer feels strongly that they will help bring people to their lots, maybe they'll feel comfortable putting the
Like a-
lots up and building the house.
The feds have the new homeowner tax credit or something like that, where, I mean, that would be a way to promote, someone might buy a more expensive lot knowing they might get a rebate on their property taxes for the first.
You know, work with all the lenders in town and say, you know, what package can we put together on the lending side of things to make home ownership more attractive and those type of things, so
yeah,
it's not always geared at the developer. And
Denver did that. They gave property tax rebate, I think, for 7 years, which, you know, I don't know how we would do that. You'd have to TIF residential, right? And I don't want to get in that discussion. But you know, stuff like that, yeah, like I agree exactly with Dan. More stuff maybe on the homeowner side, because it'd be hard to, you know, you don't want to necessarily give you know, one developer an advantage depending on what kind of lots they have over another one. But on the homeowner side, it might be something to look at.
Sure, and I understand that, and really what we're looking at in residential that we see is, it's not the developer, it's not the homeowner, and the builder, because they're all willing to go. It's the landowners and the price of land. And it doesn't make development prices make work. So then we look at, well, how can we help that? Well, the only way you can help that is maybe to provide some infrastructure help or something of that nature. And so when we get to that point, if we find something that we think might work, then we're gonna come to you with it, because if we think we can get it done that way, and it meets just one little gap that we need to make,
Yeah, I mean,
That's what we want. We
Yeah.
want to turn you loose, and then we'll be the check.
well, I'm already
We can always
running,
check
so
it. We need to grow.
That's
yeah.
true,
We're
yeah.
already trying.
Anything more on economic development?
Just to let you know, we're gonna bring this up in front of the commission again. So we'll have another opportunity to have some discussions before the Economic Development Commission. And actually, it'll be the first opportunity, but we want to talk about these kinds of things exactly, and so that we can get their feedback and bring that back to the next time we do this study session.
Yeah, that's golden. I know they'll have a lot of input, too.
Yeah, thanks for initiating this.
Yeah, thank you, as well. We're to reports of boards and commissions. Waverly Historic Preservation Commission minutes have been given to us for October 30th. Any comments? Officially received. The Library Board gave us minutes from November 11th. Any comments? Officially received. The Historic Preservation Commission we have minutes from their December 4th meeting. Please note they had perfect attendance. This is hard to do at any of these commissions. Officially received. Public Library Board, December 9th meeting. That's where they talked about the microfilming of the Waverly newspaper. I hope you noticed that, Chris. Perfect attendance also, please note. Comments? Officially received. Monthly financial report for December. Officially received. The W monthly revenue report. They're doing well, if you all noticed. Officially received. Staff comments.
We will be, took a short poll of council, we'll be adding the discussion on the rest of the budget items, including the capital projects and fund balance, to our February 2nd meeting during the regularly scheduled meeting time.
Okay. Any other staff comments?
And I'm sorry, real quickly, we do appreciate the warm weather and the sun coming out to melt the snow, because it aids in the snow removal efforts, so. Whoever's responsible for ordering that, thank you.
take credit.
Same person that sent the storm to the East Coast instead of here, so.
Thanks again, Wes. Thanks.
Course,
I
Wes,
do whatever I can.
course, Wes, that means you're also responsible for the kids not being able to sled on the sledding.
He's reducing our liability. That's fine.
Yep.
That's true too.
Council comments.
Kids don't
Mr.
really
Kinsey,
Nothing this evening.
starting with Mr. Gade.
The historic preservation, they'll be coming to us pretty soon with some pretty cool, signs that they're making up for the historical districts, so, the last meeting, we kind of planned out what the signs want to look like and where they're gonna go, and then I know they're gonna make a presentation here in the next probably couple months showing us the entrance signs as you go into the new historic district and the toppers, on top of, the street signs letting you know you're in a historic district, so there's some pretty cool stuff that they're doing, so we'll get to see that.
I like it. Yes. Councilman
Nothing from me.
Nope.
Mr. Niandler? Kangas? Nope. Infeld? Nope. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion we adjourn.
Second?
All in favor, signify with yes.
Yes.